focused upon.
And this is why I don't like the preaching from government. This isn't going to kill us, but it makes us feel good. And like you've just said, it's just about affordable, even if you're in hard times. Physically lifts you. And as you say, it is breaking bread as communion. That's probably what Christmas is all about.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are your favourites? What are the best sellers coming out of Cocoba?
So the boozy is one of my favourites, actually. I really like the Irish cream and amaretto. We take a lot of feedback from customers as well, so we're looking at what we can bring in next year, and we've just developed like a blonde caramel blend. So we're going to be doing some bits with that as well.
How's it working out for you over there, Lisa?
I'm loving it. I'm a proper chocolate addict, so I'm loving it.
Yeah, no, the salted caramel is a particular favourite always.
Thank you so much, Naomi. That was lovely. Just before we go, I'll just read a couple of bits of feedback from the monologue earlier. Thank you for saying exactly what I feel, but I'm not capable of articulating. Great from Neil Oliver tonight. What a beautiful and realistic appraisal of Britain today. That's about all from me on Neil Oliver Live. My thanks, as always, to my panel, Dr. Lisa Mackenzie, Lembit Opik, and next up, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In. Mark, what have you got coming up?
Brilliant show, Neil. Well, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In, and we start with the People's Hour. Your video calls in 3 minutes. See you shortly.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
on TV,
on radio,
And online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome to Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In, and we start with the People's Hour. Should David Walliams be sacked by ITV for his comments about certain contestants in Britain's Got Talent? That plus much more after the headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Good evening, Mark. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Large groups of migrants have clashed with French police near Dunkirk after the authorities stopped their attempts to cross the Channel. Migrants have been seen attacking French police officers with stones and tree branches. Meanwhile, the force used pepper spray to push them back. GB News was told the vast majority of migrants were young men, with 1 or 2 women and children. Meanwhile, dozens of Albanian nationals are protesting in central London against the British government's immigration policies. Many are still furious about the Home Secretary's comments earlier this month when she likened the number of asylum seekers arriving in the UK to an invasion. Close to 40,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. Britain and France are expected to agree a deal as soon as Monday to ramp up their joint efforts to reduce those numbers. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces destroyed Kherson's critical infrastructure before they fled the city yesterday. He says Kherson lacks running water, heat, electricity, medicines and food. Ukrainians are now in a race to bring it all back online as winter approaches. Well, despite this, residents are still celebrating in the streets, and Zelensky says his troops have taken control of more than 60 settlements in the region. Tory MPs have come out in defence of the Deputy Prime Minister after he was accused of being rude and aggressive towards civil servants. It's reported that multiple sources have alleged Dominic Raab created a culture of fear in his previous role as Justice Secretary. Labour described the accusations as deeply troubling, saying they raise more questions about Mr Sunak's judgment by appointing him. And the King and members of the royal family have gathered for the Festival of Remembrance. Charles and the Queen Consort arrived at the Royal Albert Hall this evening. It's the first annual remembrance service at the venue since the Queen's death. Tribute will be paid to the late Queen for her 70 years of service. Well, the Prince and Princess of Wales and Earl and Countess of Wessex also in attendance. The nation will fall silent on Sunday morning as the King leads a Remembrance Day service for the first time as monarch. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
Many thanks to Tatiana, who's back in an hour's time. This is Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In, and we start with the People's Hour, in which I'll be taking your video calls on the big stories of the day. Tonight, the stars of the People's Hour are Zachary from Leicester, David from Cardiff, Robin from St Albans and Andrew from Dudley. They'll be with me right through until 9 o'clock. What a handsome bunch they are. Now, the topics we will be debating are as follows. Is it morally wrong for nurses to go on strike? Should Britain have ID cards to tackle illegal immigration and election fraud? And should David Walliams be sacked from Britain's Got Talent? And my Saturday sidekick for the first hour of the show is the brilliant historian, journalist and broadcaster David Oldroyd Bolt. After 9, in my big opinion, sorry folks, the work from home party is over. It's time for Britain to wake up and smell the coffee and get back to work. In the big question, are beauty pageants outdated? And is Joe Biden serious about serving for another 4 years in 2024? We'll get the views of the Queen of US showbiz, royal and political reporting, Kinsey Schofield. And in the news agenda with my brilliant panel, is there a right time to have kids? And as Gordon Ramsay charges over £600 per person for food and drink on the 31st of December, is New Year's Eve overrated? Plus, tomorrow's papers live and uninterrupted 10 minutes earlier than everyone else at 10:20. That's through till 11. And in my take at 10, I don't want him to be fired, but the David Walliams scandal, following his obscene remarks about TV contestants, reflects the hypocrisy and double standards of the media elite. They are laughing at you. So this is Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In. Put something cold and fizzy in the fridge or fire up the kettle and let's have a night to remember. Your video calls in just a moment, but first, my look back at the week in Dolan's diary. And another crazy week in which former Education Secretary Gavin Williamson was sacked again for alleged threatening behaviour and aggressive language to a colleague in the House of Commons. No doubt he'll be ushered back into post when we swear in our next Prime Minister a week on Thursday. Current PM Rishi Sunak, we're told, is close to a deal with France to stop the illegal migrant crossings by giving even more money to the French to do what they should be doing in the first place, which is policing their own coastline. If at first you don't succeed, try again. The Just Stop Oil protesters have caused more economic carnage by shutting down one of Britain's main arteries, the M25. TV appearances by several members of this terrifying religious cult reveal themselves to be posher than the characters living upstairs in Downton Abbey. They make the royals look positively chavvy. It stands to reason that posh middle-class kids want net zero. After all, mummy and daddy can afford it. A victory for Sweden as this maverick and independent-minded Scandinavian country wins the argument on lockdowns this week, with the latest data showing that since 2020, Sweden has the lowest excess deaths, not just in Europe, but in the world. Who knew that lockdowns would do far more damage than the virus ever could? It's not like we told you so. Now, I'd love to chat to you about more big stories of the week, but I'll have to leave it there as I'm desperately trying to get tickets for Peter Kay. Garlic bread! Well, I'll be getting to your views very shortly in the People's Hour. They've dialed in, Mark at gbnews.uk. But first, let's speak to one of my favourite political commentators, historian and journalist, David Oldroyd-Bold. David, great to see you.
Hello, Mark.
I hope you appreciate the old-school analogue telephone.
It's lovely to see something so useful brought back into general viewership. I mean, mobile phones have no aesthetic point to them, do they, nowadays? They're just a screen that sucks you in, whereas if you had to go to a phone like that, sit down in a comfortable chair, dial it on the ringer, you might actually think a bit more about doing something other than phoning all your friends all the time.
Definitely, and those phones taught us to be patient because there was no voicemail, and if you wanted to take that call, you had to be in. Back in the day, actors would sit at home all day, literally waiting for the phone to ring.
Well, for most actors then, it was probably a benefit that they weren't on screen. I think it's a really good point that we are too easily drawn into the idea that everybody should be instantly contactable, and moreover that you have a call on their time. You know, to text someone and immediately need a reply, or to email someone and want them to get back to you straight away. It's pretty rude, I think. Whereas if you have to take your time, ring them up at a time that's convenient for them, you might A, think about a bit more about what you say, and B, think about whether it's worth saying in the first place.
Yes, I mean, I don't exaggerate. I'm the son of a publican, and I'm a child of the 80s. Back in the day, if you wanted to get hold of a gentleman of note, you'd have to find out which pub he drank at, and you would call that pub. You'd say, is Barry in?
And the landlady would say, no, never seen it.
Yeah, no, he's been busy today, especially if it was his wife calling. And we used to identify people by what they drank. So we'd be like, which Barry? Oh, he's the one that likes half a Foster's. Oh, yeah, I know him. He's not here. Look, it's great to see you. Lots to get through. A deal in the offing with France to tackle the boats crossing the Channel. Is this throwing good money after bad?
I think it must be. Look, we talked about this when I was last on your programme 2 weeks ago, that the French are the ones with the final responsibility, but we have already given them a lot of money towards this, and yet it seems to go nowhere near border patrols. It seems to go nowhere near policing migrants, and probably goes into subsidies for French farmers, which, after all, is a massive issue for them. And the idea that we're somehow going to be able to pay our way out of this, I think, is for the birds. This has to be a question of us simply saying these borders are closed, and anybody who comes here you can't sink them in the middle of the channel. There is some humanitarian impetus to look after these people, but thus far and no farther. And if the French refuse to take them back, then we will have to say, look, it's the migrants, or it's our relationship with you as a fellow European country. And I think as much as people in this country do like to bash the French, they have been reasonable partners since, I think, it was the past 300 years. We fought something like 20 wars together as partners, rather than, the previous 700 years when we fought probably 50 wars against each other. But they have been reasonable. And I think we have to somewhat dial back the rhetoric of bashing the French because it's amusing and say, look, this is a problem we have to deal with together. And it's also a question that the rest of Europe needs to put its back into dealing with. The Italians do. We know this, and the Germans, of course, took 1 million migrants under Angela Merkel. But I think we have to accept that as the floodgates open, and I don't mind using that term, and I know it's inflammatory to some people, but how else would you describe it? As more and more North Africans and Middle Easterners decide that they're going to make their lives in the West, and in Europe, Western Europe particularly, we have as a continent to come up with some idea of how we're going to distribute these people equally between us if they are indeed going to stay here.
Indeed. So, back in the day, people's concerns about the migrant crossings would see them labelled racist or xenophobic. Has this issue now entered the political mainstream?
Yes, but there, of course, are those people for whom it will always be a racist issue because they don't have to deal with the consequences. They don't live in the parts of the southeast that are just overrun with not only the people who are coming on these boats, and we know as of today it's 3% of Albanian males are now over here as asylum seekers.
There aren't many wives and children, are there?
Not that I've been able to see, but it's also the emergency services and the armed forces that have to be there to deal with this. And local services in, let's not forget, seaside communities are hugely depressed communities compared with the rest of the country. Some of the poorest communities in our nation are seaside communities. And people tend to think, well, that must be down in the southwest or up in the north. No, if you think of somewhere like Hastings or Clacton-on-Sea, these are really poor places where services are already stretched. It's desperately unfair to think that they should have to take on all of this extra burden at the same time. So, yes, it is, I think, still for some people a racist issue because it helps them in their political campaign to have open borders and for them often cheap labour, whether that be as nannies or cooks or cleaners or whatever else they have. But I think we have to accept that for the majority of people now, it's a pressing, serious issue.
And also, open borders is part of the sort of crazy, hard-left woke ideology. And that's why we battle woke every day on this programme and on the channel, because that's really the agenda. Defund the police, get rid of the nuclear family and open the borders, except that the British people, by and large, won't tolerate that. And I wonder whether that might be an issue at the next general election. I think if Rishi Sunak can tackle those illegal migrant crossings in the Channel, I think he potentially wins the next election.
It's going to be a serious issue. I mean, it is already a serious issue, but as you say, electorally...
If he gets it down from 1,000 a day entering the country illegally to 100 a day, he can say, I've been decisive, I've protected our borders.
He can say that, and the Labour Party will have nothing to say against it, because, of course, it was the Labour Party who, from 1997 to 2010, allowed in millions, quite literally millions, 1/10 of the existing population was added to it in those years.
Eastern Europe?
Eastern Europe, because of the accession, of course, to the European Union of those countries, and Tony Blair's refusal to accept, as many other European countries did, a limit on the numbers who could enter in those first years.
And why did Blair open the floodgates? Was it because he wanted to show the EU a bit of leg and pave the way to him becoming President of Europe?
Well, one of his spin doctors of the time has subsequently said in an article for The Independent some years ago that this was an attempt by New Labour to rub the right's face in diversity. That this was their way of changing the face of the nation. And they did this, I think, twofold and entirely cynically. One was to massively increase the size of the state and the number of people who depended on the state for their livings and for their housing. Therefore, you build in a Labour, inbuilt vote. And the other was by bringing in a great many migrants, economic migrants, it must be said, although there were, of course, asylum seekers at the time because of Kosovo and because of other conflicts. But to begin with, they were economic migrants who then felt beholden to that party for giving them a place in this country. And in so doing, they tried to wipe out conservatism because, of course, that, you know, it's not really in Labour's interest to stick with a demos, a populace that has consistently voted Conservative over the previous 100 years.
And an economic benefit may have been derived from the influx of Eastern European populations into the UK at that time.
Well, yes, to those people, but it
for them,
held down wages.
It held down wages and, of course, used up school places, put more pressure on the NHS and other local resources, which I guess paved the way for Brexit.
Oh, that's a very good argument. I wouldn't go with it entirely. I think there are other issues at play, but I think that is a good argument, particularly in what we now call the red wall seats, because local services, which were already pretty stretched, were then stretched absolutely to breaking point. If you can't get a flat, if you can't get a school place for your child near to where you live, if you can't access GP services within a fortnight, you know, for the most fundamental, accessible form, or should be accessible form of medical care, and you can't get there when you need it, now, of course, this is going to anger people. And of course, they're going to ask, why are these people being let in when the state cannot take care of its own people, of British nationals?
A big week for Rishi Sunak and his Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. They've got the mini budget that's coming. It's going to be very important. They're seeking to plug what is called a massive black hole, potentially 30 or 40 billion pounds, depending on which economist you speak to. Are they in danger with tax rises for everyone and spending cuts? Are they at risk of overcorrecting?
I think politically they're at risk because people never like spending cuts because they tend to think that they're an axiomatic bad. That is until you, as we've done on this programme many times, explain to them that the reason that the NHS is so overstretched is because of all the other services that are they're sucking away the money from it. The reason that you can't get a school place is because you've got masses of unionisation in the midst of the school, you know, with teachers who are never actually teaching. They used to be called the pilgrims in the NHS, people who are employed full-time in union business. There's too much fat in the middle. And this has been a case of the NHS, we know, for donkey's years now. It's almost a perennial, intractable problem that there is this massive managerial layer. And, you know, your viewers could, for instance, go on the NHS job site today and count up how many of the woke jobs there are, how many diversity, equity, inclusion officers are still being advertised for at fairly considerable salaries, 40, 50, 60,000 a year. Now, is that something that we can't think of cutting?
Yeah.
I think the viewers would accept that they want the NHS to be well funded, but they want it to be on medical services, on practitioners, on nurses, on clinicians. They don't want it to be on diversity, inclusion officers.
Before we get to our wonderful viewers, tickets for Peter Kay are going like hotcakes. I think they're already on eBay for about £2,000 a pop. Is Peter Kay the funniest man in the country?
I think he's got a very good claim to be so. He's certainly the man who warms people's hearts the most, I think. This is the key to his success. What is it, 13 years since he last toured? And then as soon as he announces this, absolute sellout. And I think brilliant that these tickets are available on eBay. It shows that the free market works. There's always a demand.
Nicely done. There you go. Well, look, I'm delighted to say that David Oldroyd-Bolt is with me taking your calls for the next 45 minutes. And we, of course, are going to get to all of your views. In fact, Cal, let me have a shot of our fantastic guests in the People's Hour tonight. We've got viewers from around the country, north, west, south and east. And they'll be tackling the following questions. Is it morally wrong for nurses to go on strike? Do we need ID cards to stop illegal immigration and voter fraud? Plus, should David Walliams be sacked from Britain's Got Talent? All of that to come. See you in 3.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England,
Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio,
And online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In and the People's Hour, in which the first hour of this programme every Saturday is dedicated to your video calls. Now, let's kick off with the NHS, and nurses have voted to go on strike for the first time in their 106-year history. The Royal College of Nursing are seeking an inflation-busting pay rise of 17%. Given they went through hell in the pandemic, is this a worthy request or an unreasonable demand as the country faces unprecedented economic challenges? And is the decision by nurses to go on strike morally wrong, given the fact that it could impact patient care or even cost lives? Let's speak to Robin in St Albans. Hi, Robin.
Hi, good evening.
Great to have you on the show. What a beautiful part of the country. Hertfordshire, of course. Roman Verulamium, and you look like a bit of a rather special antiquity yourself.
Yes, very much so.
But very well preserved, just like one of those coins. Now, Robin, tell me, what do you think about the nurses going on strike? Yes or no?
No. I think it's morally wrong for them to go on strike, to be honest with you. However, having said that, unfortunately, I had to spend some time in hospital recently visiting my mother on a regular basis. And what I noticed was there's a massive understaffing because they had a board that listed the number of nurses and assistants that were meant to be in every day. And I would say about 2/3 were in. So there was at least a third missing. So I'm not sure how they, and they all looked unbelievably stressed. So I have great sympathy for them, but morally, I do not think they should strike, no.
No, and the issue, Robin, is that the RCN are saying this will not impact emergency care, only non-urgent care. But I don't know about you, I'm not sure what non-urgent is. If you've got I don't know, pain in your lower back, if you've got a migraine, if you've got a skin complaint, all of that sounds urgent to me.
Yeah, well, everybody's own issues are obviously urgent. If you take yourself either off to hospital or you're already in hospital. You know, my mother was on this ward with, you know, other very old people. And, they all didn't need care all the time, but I'm not kind of sure what, emergency care would be in that instance. I do think, like a lot of other services, I think there are certain organisations that should not be allowed to strike at all. And we have that with the army, we have that with the police. It should be true of the fire brigade, it should be true of the railways, it should be true of the civil servants. I actually also think it should be true of teachers. Again, I have great sympathy for all of these professions. I think they're all stressed, they're all overworked. The argument about whether they're underpaid or not is an individual debate.
Yeah, however, there is the emotional argument with regard to nurses, because I'm sure you'll agree, you'll have the same feeling, Robin, which is that we love our nurses. They really are angels, and it's amazing how they go above and beyond the call of duty, working long hours, and of course, during the pandemic, they've been to hell and back.
No, absolutely.
Is there not an emotional... Yeah, go on. Is there not an emotional argument to give them the money that they've earned it?
Last year, they have been offered a pay rise. Now, albeit it's nowhere near inflation. We are in a situation where a year ago we didn't have inflation. Had they been offered 4 or 5% a year ago, they would have probably bitten the hands off of the people that were offering it. But I do think that 17.5% is just unrealistic. Inflation will continue to rise. Interest rates will rise. Everybody else will want the same kind of level of pay rise, and it's just not sustainable.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's certainly the view of plenty of my viewers to this show, and it's something that I'd like to bring Zachary in on. Let's now catch up with Zachary, who's joining the conversation from Leicester, of course, in the East Midlands. Zachary, welcome to the show. How do you react to what Robin's had to say? As far as Robin's concerned, nurses should be in a group that are never allowed to go on strike. What's your view?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, and I was hoping not to be drawn immediately into a question of what's moral, because I tend to start from a perspective of what's legal, and of course it's legal to strike, and I would never suggest in a democracy that the right to strike should be in any way curbed or certainly not repealed. Is it moral to strike is another matter, and it might be moral if it were just about pay, but I'm concerned, not necessarily in regard to the nursing dispute, but I'm concerned that this not being the first industry to be involved in strike action recently, there have been the rail workers and the postal workers. I'm always concerned when it comes to strikes that there's something deeper going on in regard to politics rather than pay or working conditions or whatever the subject of the strike happens to be. And I was interested to read the comments of the General Secretary and Chief Executive of the Royal College of Nursing, and she said, and I quote, this is a defining moment in our history, and our fight will continue through strike action and beyond for as long as it takes to win justice for the nursing profession and our patients. So that suggests to me that she's giving this some greater purpose extending to the patients. And it seems to me that the best way for the nursing profession to give justice, whatever that means, to patients is to carry on with the job and be good nurses, and not to abandon that or to lessen the commitment to it through strike action, however well-meaning it might be. I'm concerned that there might be a deeper motive. And maybe that's unfair, and maybe I'm allowing my view to be coloured by recent experiences, in particular Michael Lynch, or Mick as I think he likes to be known, of the RMT, who's made some comments in recent times that I think are a direct challenge to the authority of the government. You know, some of the things he said while Liz Truss was briefly Prime Minister I thought were dreadful. Again, I quote, "The quicker they get out of the way and let people who are competent in, the better it will be for all of us." Again, it suggests some grander purpose. You know, they're not there for that grander purpose. They're there to represent their members. If they want to get involved in politics, fine, go and join a party, stand for Parliament, but please leave politics out of it.
Amen to that. Zachary, I understand your reluctance to get into the moralising when it comes to this strike, because that's an absolute can of worms, philosophically. However, with a waiting list of around 7 million people who are waiting for non-urgent treatment at the moment in the NHS, it's pretty clear that this strike will put more pressure on the NHS, and therefore it's likely that people will suffer and lives could be lost. Nurses could have blood on their hands for this strike.
Yes, and you're right to press me on the moral question there, Mark, because that was part of what's on the screen. And I know that live TV time is tight, so I won't use too many words. I'll just say, yes, in that context, it is morally wrong for nurses to strike. If patient safety is in jeopardy, then of course it's morally wrong.
Yes, interesting stuff. Let's bring David Oldroyd-Bolt into this conversation, who is my sidekick for the programme, historian and political commentator. How do you see this one playing out, David? Because the issue is the government will be tempted to make a deal, especially because the public have a lot of affection for our nurses and the NHS. But it could be the thin end of the wedge with doctors, police officers, teachers also looking for a pay rise, as well, of course, as lawyers and other public sector workers.
I think that's the key point. The government must not give in on this issue, because once you give in on an issue of paying conditions in inflationary times, in times when it's hard for everybody to make ends meet, then you create a sort of cascade effect. And every public servant in the land will be threatening to withdraw his or her labour in order to essentially extort the state, which is their benefactor, to make them better off when the people paying their wages are worse off. I think it's an interesting thing that the Royal College of Nurses won't tell us how many of its 300,000 members voted for this, never mind what proportion, as in took part in the ballot, never mind what proportion actually voted to strike. I think if we're going to talk about democratic institutions, it rather behooves them to tell the people whom they're threatening by saying that they're going to withdraw these essential services, how many of their members actually want to do it. I've always thought that there ought to be a minimum floor in these things. Some unions have it, some don't. I think Zachary's point about the unions not being political is, if I may say, somewhat mistaken. The entire point of unions is to be political. That's why they were founded, to give their politics an outlet, to give their members' politics an outlet. And the unions' links with the Labour Party go right back to the foundation of the Labour Party. So as much as we might like there to be these disinterested guardians of workers' rights, I'm afraid that they simply don't exist in this context. And if nurses do insist on striking, then I should say to Mr Sunak that he must emulate Ronald Reagan, who in 1981 fired 11,000 air traffic controllers, who, being an essential service, were told by presidential order not to go on strike, because you cannot run a country when essential services withdraw themselves on conditions of pay like this. They continue to go on strike, and so he fired 11,345 of them. He refilled the jobs within a month. I'm sure there are plenty of people in this country who have the ability to be nurses. I'm sure that many of those are already in the profession, or in the vocation, I would prefer to call it. However, I don't think there's ever going to be a problem with recruitment, particularly given the extraordinarily generous pension conditions that obtain in the public sector of this country. Their pay, we know, is not of the highest, but it is a vocation. They choose to do this because they presumably have some kind of caring impetus. That being so, and those pension arrangements extraordinarily generous, they should, I think, count themselves lucky that, though they will, of course, suffer, as we will all suffer through inflation, when it comes to their time to retire, they will be in a much better position than all of the people paying their wages who have to fund their own retirements.
Well, I'll offer my 2 pennies worth, which is that the nurses do deserve a pay rise. There is a moral case, but the problem is that we shut the economy down for 2.5 years. In the failed experiment of lockdowns, we've bust the economy. We now can't afford it. Well done, everyone. But look, folks, I'm going to get back to you on our next topic. But Robin, final thought on this. We've got threatened industrial action from the rail workers, the RMT union, of course, civil servants, teachers, nurses, government lawyers and other public sector professionals. Do you think that the unions could bring down this government?
They could. They could certainly have a good attempt at it. You know, I've lived through it before with, Scargill and Maggie Thatcher and all of that. And, it was really particularly grim times. And of course they could, yeah. If they all decided to go out and strike, the country would grind to a halt. I just want to pick up on the point that I don't think you can fire all the nurses, because I'm not sure we can replace them, really. We got rid of, 20,000 policemen and we still haven't got them back. So, but yeah, it really worries me, and the government has to be strong on this.
Robin and Zachary, you've played a blinder. Stick around because we'll get you back on the People's Hour in a few minutes' time. But it's time now for our next story. Stephen Kinnock of the Labour Party has suggested we could use ID cards to stem illegal immigration, resurrecting a new Labour policy idea from 20 years ago. And the Tories are trying to rush through voter ID legislation. So you'd basically have to prove who you were when you voted in a local or general election. So are ID cards a good way of controlling illegal immigration into this country, or a profound threat to our civil liberties? And would voter ID preserve the integrity of our democracy, or is it a step too far? Let's speak to David Hobbs in Cardiff. Hey, David.
Hi, Mark. Good to be on the show. Pleasure to see you.
It's great to have you on the programme, and you've got Zachary and Robin to support you in this conversation. First of all, let's talk about ID cards. Do you think it would make it harder for people to enter the country illegally or stay here illegally if everybody had that kind of identification?
I've worked in this background in the past. I used to manage UK visa and citizenship application service centres in the UK, and I'm currently a human resources specialist in immigration, working in the public sector in Wales. Firstly, what we must realise is that the UK currently has various ID schemes in place for migrants with time-limited leave to remain, such as international students and temporary workers, etc., as well as people who have been granted settlement indefinite leave to remain in the form of the biometric residence permit, abbreviated to the BRP card. There is also currently a similar ID card in place for asylum seekers after they've been processed by the Home Office, called an application registration card. And that certifies that an asylum claimant can remain in the UK while their application is pending. From the 1st of January 2025, all BRP cards will expire, and anyone who previously had been issued with a BRP card and future applicants will be able to prove their immigration status solely online. This means that we're starting to adopt digital technology, moving away from physical ID cards to prove immigration statuses. And I believe that given austerity, cuts in public spending, and the perpetual cry to remove layers of bureaucracy in a digitising world, it would be a complete waste of time, money and resources to roll out such a scheme to harvest everyone's personal information in the UK and to issue everyone with a physical national ID card. What would it prove that currently that cannot be proved currently? For British citizens themselves, the passport can suffice in providing improving identification. So why do we need to waste public funds and resources to implement such a thing? Funds and resources in this sector should be instead directed to helping frontline border force and Home Office staff, as well as the police, with regards to tackling things like illegal immigration and election fraud.
Yes, I mean, David, the issue with digital ID is it opens the door, doesn't it, to state and technocratic control of our lives. Worst case scenario being the Chinese social credit system, in which if you're spotted on CCTV littering or getting a parking ticket that you don't pay, suddenly you're not able to buy your groceries at the local supermarket.
Absolutely, yes, definitely. And it, opens the door to human rights abuses, GDPR legislation being breached, perhaps. Again, I think it's a complete waste of time to even consider such an archaic concept, which was mooted 20 years ago and subsequently scrapped.
David, what do you think about this? Because New Labour have been keen to have ID cards going back to the years of Tony Blair.
Well, show me an issue around civil liberties or around immigration or around population where the left doesn't try and impose ID cards. It's been a canard of theirs for years because it extends the power of the state. I think there is an absolute fundamental of being British that you are not required to prove to the state who you are. The state is required to prove that you are not who you say you are. We must not back down on this. It would do damn all about immigration. Once someone's here, they're here, and it would, I'm sure, be very easy, if you were so minded, to walk into any city centre and find someone who would sell you an approximation, whether good or bad, of a national ID card for whatever it's going to cost in very quick order. It would do absolutely nothing about it. As you say, all it does is extend the tentacles of the state yet further into lives that are already too strangled by them. And I agree with you that there is a risk with this, that we move towards a social credit system, particularly as more and more payment, whether that be of bills or for daily goods and services, becomes digital. If we then have a digital ID system, what's to stop the two being intertwined and the state having the complete and utter ability to look at you wherever you go, whatever you do? It strips away privacy. So I think Mr. Kinnock, A, is being stupid to say that this would do anything about immigration, and B, disingenuous to pretend that it's about anything other than extending the power of the state.
OK, well, we'll come back to David shortly. Both Davids, David Hobbs in Cardiff, our brilliant GB News viewer, and David Oldroyd Bolt. But let's also bring Zachary and Robin, two other viewers, to Mark Dolan's Saturday Night into the conversation. And Zachary, what about this idea of showing your ID when you go to vote? We've seen big problems with the credibility of US elections in recent years. Don't you think it would restore public trust in democracy if people had to prove who they were to vote?
No, I don't think so. I think there ought to be credible ways of challenging voter fraud without resorting to this gross exaggeration of identity cards. And just to broaden it, if I may, Mark, you're right to say this is something that New Labour were talking about 20 years ago. And at the time, I thought it was quite benign. I thought, these are people who grew up as student radicals. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, all of that. And then when I saw the actual legislation that came in, it terrified me. And to bring it right up to date, of course, in the context of what we've seen in the last couple of years, vaccine passports and all of that, or COVID passports, whatever they were called. Even the term cards, I imagine it's not card, it's plastic. I imagine the plastic will soon be superseded by some kind of digital card. I exist with a BlackBerry, and I'm finding that what your wonderful colleague Neil Oliver refers to as digital totalitarianism, making me out of time, out of date, not being able to get into gigs without a big fuss beforehand because I don't have the right equipment. So I do fear that what sounds like a benign card that you carry around becomes something digital, in time digital only, and one becomes culturally, socially disenfranchised. To bring it back to the voter issue, disenfranchised more properly if you don't have a card to go and vote. Terrifying.
Yes, we had a taste of digital tyranny in the course of the pandemic when you couldn't get into your local pub for a pint without scanning a QR code. Welcome to hell. Robin, last thoughts from you on this. Devil's advocate, if you are an upstanding citizen with nothing to hide, what's the problem with carrying an ID?
I personally don't have any issue with it, and I'll tell you why, for a couple of reasons. One, we already have driving license, we have passports, we have all that information. If anybody wants to stop us and find anything about us, they can. But I actually run a sports tech company, and it's absolutely critical that every fighter in one of our sports has a digital card. They cannot compete in a competition without their ID card. It has all their medical data on it, has their previous fighting information on it. So if they were knocked out in a previous fight 2 weeks before, they're not allowed to fight. It has all their drug testing information, etc. I have no problem with digital ID cards. I think nobody else should.
There you go. Well, let me tell you, folks, that Robin, the two Davids and Zachary will be back for more in 3 minutes' time. Coming up, should David Walliams be sacked from Britain's Got Talent? Of course, you might have heard that story. He referred to a contestant as the C-bomb. He made sexual remarks about another contestant. Should ITV fire him? We'll debate that next.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky. That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In and the People's Hour, in which I'm taking your video calls. If you want to be part of the show next week, drop me an email right now, mark@gbnews.uk. Let's get to our final story, and the comedian David Walliams has been forced to apologise after he was accused of making derogatory and sexually explicit comments about contestants on Britain's Got Talent, the show he judges. His comments were picked up by microphones with a transcript passed to the Guardian newspaper. It reported that in a conversation with colleagues, not intended for air, Walliams referred to one older performer as a C word 3 times, and it's the bad C word, after the contestant made a jibe at his expense. And after a female contestant walked off stage, Walliams is alleged to have commented, "She's like the slightly boring girl you meet in the pub that thinks you want to F them, but you don't." Walliams has since apologised, but should he be fired as a judge on Britain's Got Talent? Let's talk to Andrew Pritchard in Dudley. Hi, Andrew.
Hello there, Mark. Good evening.
Great to have you on the show. What do you think? I'm not one for cancel culture, so I think he should stay, but what's your view?
I think Walliams should be sacked. He was disrespectful. He tried to defend himself by saying that the remarks were never intended to be shared, but he'd already done the damage by then. Those comments had come out in a transcript, and basically he should be sacked.
Do you think it flies in the face of his brand as a family entertainer?
definitely flies in the face of his brand being a family entertainer for sure. I mean, when you look back at the 60s and 70s family entertainers, you wouldn't dream that any of those types of entertainers would come out with such remarks.
Did it surprise you? Are you a fan of David Walliams?
I'm afraid I'm not a fan of Mr. Walliams. Let's face it, he hasn't done a considerable amount, really, in my opinion. He's starred in a sitcom which is a Marmite sort of sitcom. It's one of those types of programs you either love or hate. And he's written some books and made an awful lot of money out of it. And here he is now these days sitting on a panel of judges judging people when he hasn't really had that much experience in the world of talent himself.
And Andrew, some would say that we all make outrageous comments to our friends in private. Is it fair that he's being hauled over the coals for a private conversation?
Well, Mark, you make these comments and you sometimes never know who's listening. And it's always best to be careful in that situation, isn't it? You don't want to say anything too controversial, especially if you're a public figure, because it has a habit of getting out into the public domain. And then you get a situation like this where he's clearly being caught out.
Let's bring our brilliant other viewer, David from Cardiff, into this. David, should Walliams, the creator of Little Britain, should he be sacked? Yeah, but no, but yeah.
I don't think he should lose his job. I'd like to take a balanced view in terms of he does have a social responsibility because he is an international best-selling children's author, prerogative with there being children's author, so does hold that responsibility to act as a positive and good role model to children. The halo has slipped. The mask has slipped very slightly. He's apologised for his comments. He's not been without controversy in the past with regards to some of the comedic acts that he's performed on Little Britain, which perhaps wouldn't get onto TV nowadays. However, considering that he's apologised and considering that he's quite a well-loved figure and a mainstay of Britain's Got Talent, he always plays that aloof character and protagonising Simon Cowell, which we all enjoy watching. I think he should keep his job. Perhaps a kind of a final warning, perhaps. And I'm sure he's regretful about his comments.
Andrew, it's interesting what you've had to say there. Do you think that we hold celebrities to too high a standard, one that we might not hold for ourselves?
I think that we look on our celebrities to behave themselves. And they don't, invariably, especially after 9 o'clock at night. Some of the people who appear on television after 9 o'clock at night are, in my opinion, an absolute disgrace. They really do show themselves up. But I'd just like to say one thing. I think there's a bit of an ITV clique. There are certain celebrities who work for ITV who can do no wrong at all. And these celebrities, such as Walliams and also Philip Schofield was recently found out, where he went to the Queen's lying in state and all the talk was that he podged the queue. And ITV backed him up to the hilt on that. And they just don't have the courage, they don't seem to have the courage to do anything about it when any of their stars step out of line.
Well, look, a fascinating and nuanced debate. Cal and Chloe, I don't know if you can give me all of my viewers at the same time. Do you think we can manage that? Because what I'd love to do is get an overview of what you all think about David Walliams and whether or not he should be fired or whether he should keep his job. So we've got the two Davids, Andrew, Robin and Zachary. Please raise your hand now, including David Oldroyd-Bolt. If you think that Walliams should be fired, raise your hand. OK, so one vote for his swift dismissal, but the others are keeping the faith. Can I thank the two Davids, Zachary, Andrew and Robin, for a brilliant debate. And chaps, please come back and see us on the People's Hour again soon. I've loved having your company. Now let's just have a final goodbye with our fantastic historian, political commentator and journalist, the wonderful, the one and only David Oldroyd-Bolt. So, David, lots to talk about this week as we conclude the People's Hour. And in America, the situation looks very unstable, doesn't it? You've got a president struggling with his own cognition. Meanwhile, the halo has slipped for Donald Trump. What do you think is going to happen in America in 2024?
What I think is going to happen is that Donald Trump will run for president and win. What should happen, of course, is that he had a fit of outbreak of sanity and realised that his winning would destroy America even more than it already is destroyed. I agree with you. President Biden is clearly not in a good way. He should not be anywhere near a position of power, never mind in charge of the world's largest nuclear arsenal. The problem for the Republicans is that they're still, although this seems to have slipped a bit, they're still enthralled to the cult of personality of Donald Trump. Rick DeSantis would be a much better presidential candidate. I think he does have the ability to unite America again. But it's going to come down, of course, to whether you want the Democrats with their increasingly woke agenda and with their massive expansion of the state, incredible expansion of spending that makes what we're doing as a state look piddling, or whether you want Trump, who makes Americans feel good about themselves. I think this is something that everybody underestimates about him, because we see him as this vulgarian, as this appalling man who shouldn't be allowed anywhere near a civilized dinner table. Well, look, we're not inviting him to dinner. The Americans want someone who makes America great again, and they see that in him, rightly or wrongly.
Fascinating conversation. Thank you to the brilliant David Oldroyd-Bolt, who will return to the programme very soon. Coming up in Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In the big question, are beauty pageants outdated? We'll speak to Miss Great Britain 2022. Plus, in my big opinion, it's time for Britain to get back to work. I'm sorry, work from home doesn't work at all. See you in 3.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online, this is GB News.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio,
And online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
My thanks to our brilliant contributors to the People's Hour. If you want to be part of that show next week, then drop me an email right now, mark@gbnews.uk. The first hour of Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In, dedicated to your video calls. We'll do it a week today. So welcome to the show. In my big opinion, the work from home party is over.